everybody. It's a huge honour to have Errollyn Wallen here this evening with us. And not just here this evening, but about to become a member of our college, an Honorary Fellow. So we're all terribly excited about that. And I've been listening to a gazillion podcasts that you've done recently. It's been a very busy May.
Yes.
So I know that you're going to have absolutely masses to tell us and to inspire us with. But I think I should start by just saying a few words of introduction about Errollyn. Now, I know everybody knows who she is already, but there are a few things that we should draw your attention to. First of all, I think we are correct in saying that you are one of the most acclaimed and widely performed contemporary composers, certainly in Britain and I'm sure further afield. You're born in Belize and brought up in London, Tottenham no less, and, and music ran in the family. Your father was an amateur singer and introduced you to jazz and blues, and your uncle, he features quite a lot in your book, Becoming a Composer. He made sure you took piano lessons and sounded like quite a hard taskmaster, but was also the first to encourage you to maybe become a composer. And your brother's a jazz trumpeter, Byron Wallen, so famous family. I thought it was so interesting that you studied dance at first in New York and then sort of gradually moved on, music at Goldsmiths and then composition at King's College London and then King's College Cambridge a bit later.
Yes.
You're the first woman to receive an Ivor Novello Award for a body of work and the first black woman to have a work featured in the BBC Proms. How about that? Your output is mind-blowing. It's definitely about quality, not quantity, but I can't resist totting up. I think at last count it was 22 operas, is that right? And that's on top of a huge catalogue of orchestral, chamber, and vocal works. I was intrigued to note that your recordings have travelled almost 8 million kilometres in space. That's 186 orbits around the Earth on a NASA mission. We'll talk a little bit about your individual works later, but I do want to just point out that Errollyn composed the music for the opening ceremony of the Paralympic Games in 2012. Not just that, but the Queen's Golden and Diamond Jubilees, and a specially commissioned song for climate change in COP 2021. So that was COP 26. She held the Faculty of Music's Wart residency here between 2021 and 22, working with Cambridge University Orchestra and performing songs from the Errollyn Wallen Songbook and holding a composer's workshop. You've done a lot of media as well. I am about to finish, so there was so much to cover and I've had to be quite selective. But I did want to just mention the musical masterpieces on Sky Arts, and that was with the musician and presenter Mylene Klaas. They both teamed up with leading orchestras from around the UK and presented wholly new performances of all sorts of well-known works, including Vivaldi's Four Seasons and Bizet's Carmen. Together, you and Mylene delved into the stories behind the famous scores, revealing those composers' secrets and techniques. So I think it's only fair that we should delve into some of your secrets. Now, let's kick off with your memoir. You published Becoming a Composer, and it's a great deal more than just a memoir. It's poems, essays, score notes, programme notes. It's a whole mosaic, diary entries. Now, allegedly, it demystifies the world of composing, but I actually think that undersells it a bit because it's much too intriguing to demystify. I think what critics meant is that it has a hefty dose of the everyday, events that we can all relate to. And I'm going to mention a couple. I noticed that you do wait until the deadline before you start composing. You're famous
Not
for that.
always, not always, not always.
Apparently it's all generating in the background, but I thought, gosh, that makes me feel better. And I know this isn't supposed to be amusing, but somehow it was rather touching that you had your car stolen with the only copy of your latest composition inside. And I just thought, how many of us have been in that situation of someone saying to us, didn't you have a backup? Why didn't you save it? But we've all been there. Perhaps not quite so dramatically. So how do you manage to keep yourself grounded, given everything that you've achieved? How do you keep it real?
I'm quite a down-to-earth person, I always have been. I'm quite a silly person, and I find the world extremely interesting. So, and a lot of the impressions of the world actually go into my music. And I think because I must have shown talent as a child, but it was never remarked upon. So to me, composing has always been this matter-of-fact, everyday thing. That's
an absolutely lovely, modest way of putting it. I must have shown talent as a child.
Well, what I mean, I was always being begged to stop practicing, so that's why.
But clearly you are hugely talented. But I mean, one of the things that I loved most in reading about you was that, just as you say, perhaps you didn't get recognition early on. You know, you had to really forge your own way. And, you know, you had to make things happen for yourself. You had to take responsibility. You had agency, bags of it. I'm going to quote from your autobiography now. Nothing about me fitted the picture of a composer. I wasn't white, male, dead, in a wig, or on a wall. But there came a day when I realised that no one was ever going to play my music unless I did something about it myself. That really struck me. And that is exactly what you did. So I'm sure our audience here would find it quite inspiring to know a bit more about how did you take charge of your fate? What drove you and what steps did you take?
I was working with a collection of musicians who I admired very much, and I thought contemporary music really can be fun. I was thinking of all the music I'd written and thinking about how I could present this music with the friends whose performing I loved. And so but it was back in the days when, to be honest, to be a composer, the really only route was through either publisher or somebody on high had to give the nod to ensembles or orchestras. It was a very, very narrow window for anyone to get into. And as well as working classical music, you know, to earn a living while I was studying for my master's, I was working as a keyboard player in lots of different situations, in pop music, in an alternative comedy scene, in care homes, and I saw the power of different types of music, the power of music in different settings, the effect it had on people. So then my next thought was not only that we should put on a concert, but that the concert should involve chocolate, and be fun and be enjoyable. So it was really a one-off activity as I planned it, but it was such a joyous occasion. It was back in the days when people could really write a big long review. So we had a half-page review in the Independent, going through each work in great detail. And actually that was it then.
Was that 1990?
Yes,
was that
and that was my group Ensemble X.
Yes, Ensemble X. So I think you need to tell us a bit more about the chocolate. Is it, so I think I read that you gave everyone a Mars bar when they arrived.
Yes, they did. And, and the next year it was a piece of cake. But, you know, all the musicians I gathered were sort of, I think this part of the coming trend of musicians who were really versatile, classically trained, but had worked in different areas with jazz or, you know, popular. And so we had a much more relaxed attitude.
I've got a quote here from your time there. This was something, again, that really struck me. It was about how, what was the motto you had for your ensemble? We don't break down barriers in music. We don't see any.
Yes.
I thought that was very powerful. I mean, it's an inspiring attitude, and you've been completely masterful at transforming challenges into opportunities. But how about, when things conspire to keep you down? I think it would be, I'd love to know how you deal with that, because how do you spur yourself on when it does feel like the world's against you?
Yes, there was a very dark time when I remember talking to a young composer that was applying for a course, and I was saying, why do you want to be a composer? And this young man, about 21, said, because of the lifestyle. And I thought, oh, okay. Consider yourself, in a bedsit, having no money at all, nobody's playing your music. That is really a possible outcome. And you can work really hard as a composer, you can have lots of performances, but it's actually quite hard to earn a living and keep everything together. And there was there came a point fairly early on when I thought, I must see which of my skills are transferable, because I could see a likely future of, poverty. And so I said to myself, Errollyn, this is the first and last time I've ever said this. I said, I think you ought to go away for 3 days and think really seriously about this. I know you love doing music, but you've got to think about the future. That's the last time I was sensible. And then I came back 3 days and I said, we're doing it. And that was it, so I haven't looked back. So you have to take the rough and smooth if you're an artist. Not least, sometimes, you're in the spotlight. Other times, you're just not. And I've seen the changes in fortunes of several composers. And so you learn to keep your own counsel and try and forge your own path, making the music you think that's important.
Wow, I find that incredibly inspiring. It's never going to be all plain sailing. You might get there in the end, but there are going to be lots of bumps in the road, and you have to take the good with the bad. I think you have quite a lot in common with academics in terms of, fending off a life of penury. But now let's have a think about these podcasts that you've done recently. You're the cover star and feature this month of BBC Music magazine.
I know.
Discussing why the sea, sky and solitude are all key elements in creating sound worlds, magical sound worlds. I think you live in Scotland?
Yes.
In a lighthouse overlooking the Orkneys, is that right? I thought that might be just a legend, but
yes, I do.
Lucky you.
There was a website called lighthousesforsale.co.uk, which I stumbled across, so that's why.
Really? Yes. In Yemen you can buy tanks on Facebook, but I've never heard of lighthouses.co.uk. I think you've just upstaged my anecdote. So in that case, lighthouses, that kind of fits in with Desert Island Discs, which I think you recorded last week.
Yes.
Is it out yet?
We're not sure yet. We're not.
I don't think it's gone live. So can we have a sneak preview? What?
You want to know my luxury item?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's Wigmore Hall, and
hang on. I knew you were ambitious. But
so we recorded this time, last week, and I said if John Major can take Oval Cricket Ground, I can take Wigmore Hall. But particularly, I love that piano. It's this beautiful Steinway D, and I always remember playing it. But then there was another little thing I sneaked in, which is a little flap. The middle pedal, which you have in a grand piano, would operate a flap. Out of which a cake would be dispensed. And they let me have it, so the standards have slipped.
I certainly prefer that second example, because I don't think we should really be following what the government does in any serious way. But a middle pedal that is a cake flap, that's good. Patent it. What about the songs that you chose? Anyone stick out?
Gosh, it was hard. But in fact, I was only asked about 2 or 3 weeks beforehand, so I didn't have time to think. Am I allowed to say? Is it not a spoiler?
No, we'll keep your secret. No, we won't tell anyone.
Well, I started with Stevie Wonder's Signed, Sealed, Delivered, because Yeah, it's so fantastic, and that's a track that improved my driving from Inverness Airport to the Lighthouse, because it's just fantastic. And Peter Grimes is there, Bach, double violin concerto. But when we do, right at the end of the interview, I didn't realise you have to choose just one track, and that I hadn't thought about. So it's really bugging me. So I keep sending them little emails, adding this and that.
Also, you're not going to tell us which one you...
Well, I took the Bach double violin concerto in D minor, but I know I would miss the sound of an orchestra, so it's tricky.
I bet you negotiated. So I'll have a whole box set, please. Oh, brilliant. And then earlier this month, you also recorded the BBC podcast, The Essay. And that was a really interesting one. That was writing a personal letter to, I think it was an imaginary young composer in the end. And you reflected on themes like dedication, jealousy, the impact of hard work. And I think dedication and hard work we can all get, but tell us about jealousy. How did that feature?
Well, it is a competitive field, and I have students, and actually just a few days before I'd been at a concert, and a young composer had said to me that she was struggling with being jealous of, she just said it to me, and I thought I said use jealousy, because actually jealousy means there's something that somebody else is doing that you're not, and also try and think about what that person is, what they're doing you're not. And I thought, well, I suppose envy does come into, but it's a real thing to think of. And sometimes my students do, I had one student who was always saying, say I'm the best, say I'm the best, say there's no other. Do you know what I mean? It's a thing you've got to learn to live with, that you'll be writing music maybe different to somebody else, but their style of music may be getting attention at that time. But it's a very real thing, and it tests your resolve in a sense, the things you believe in.
That really resonates with me, because in my early career, I spent quite a lot of time working on avant-garde literary movements in Arabic and Egypt. And, it was so weird to see how this avant-garde is so incredibly unpopular. These movements at the time, they don't get any traction. And then within 20 years, they're at the top of the establishment. And this sort of wheel of fortune turns. But you have to have faith in yourself, don't you? You have to have that amazing confidence, or you would just go with the flow.
Yeah.
So it's almost an accolade to be unpopular in the moment and then gradually grow.
Yes, and one of the other things I said in the letters was that, in a way, who decides who will be remembered? And some of it is not based on necessarily very valid criteria. So you've just got to,
So very diplomatically put. Basically, the gatekeepers can be spoilers, right? Now, there's something that you did that I think must have been absolutely terrifying. I'm sure there are lots of things that you did that have been terrifying, but this one, having one of your works actually premiered at the last night of the proms. So the first outing of your work at the last night of the proms, this massive, iconic occasion, and especially taking on something as central as Jerusalem. How did, reinventing it, reimagining it, how did that feel? Were you terrified?
I think the most terrifying thing was being asked 3 weeks to the day beforehand to do it. So that was the thing that...
They never complain about a deadline again.
And but it was during lockdown, and orchestras had to be halved, and they had to be sitting really far apart, so there had to be a new arrangement. My particular contribution caused a lot of outcry, but it's only because the targets had moved. Originally, the conductor had been receiving death threats. I don't know why. And then somebody else, to do with Land, Hope and Glory, every year there was that outcry. And so when that died down, I noticed, it's moving to me. And I wasn't doing anything that controversial, because Jerusalem has already, I've come across maybe 30, 40, 50 arrangements of it. But in that climate, somehow Boris Johnson was interviewed, suddenly I found myself, I was asked, they begged me to on the Piers Morgan show, and I was thinking, something's afoot. But it was just sort of silly. In my mind, I was making something possible. It was a wonder that proms even went on at all. It was so hard for the musicians. So, but I think the BBC had intended me just to make a reduction, not to do what I did, which was to comment on the Commonwealth and dedicate it to the Windrush generation, and to sort of bring everybody into the fold, because anybody, the Commonwealth, Jerusalem is a hymn. You know, everybody knows that hymn from childhood.
It's pretty loaded. Yeah, I mean, it's brave to take on something like that at the last night of the proms, under a Conservative government. I mean, all of these things, and in lockdown, and with the cutbacks. And. I think you're my heroine.
Didn't feel that brave.
So now, you once said, famously, that you would strangle the next person who came up with an idea for an opera. So be careful, everyone. But you also wrote that it's really interesting to ask what subjects make good opera. And I remember your answer being very down to earth, but yet incredibly profound as well. And I wondered if you could just share with everybody. Well, first it was a story that needs to be told.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And then it was a plot that kind of can unfold in lots of different directions. Yes. And I think you said ideally it would include, lying, murder, all sorts of other horrors. But
I remember somebody writing to me from a maximum security prison, and it was like a 10-page letter, and it was an incredible letter, but this prisoner had no idea that an opera could be about your own life. There's an opera of mine that had gone, I think it's about the Silent Twins, June and Jennifer Gibbons, but he was so overcome. So I think that was all. But people do write to me all the time with ideas for, and they are everywhere. The stories.
What's the craziest one? Okay, there's the maximum security prison. That's pretty crazy. But what's the absolute craziest one you've had? Or that not that you yourself have had necessarily, but that someone's come to you and said, "I've got this amazing idea."
Oh gosh, I can't even remember now. But usually, the thing about a good idea is that the creators of that opera have to be able to live with it for possibly years. So what might seem really exciting,
it needs to stand the test of time.
Yes, not just be a sensationalist thing. But the fact is, I always feel it's how you tell a story as well. But I'm obsessed with the form of opera. It's just, I think it's one of the art forms that involves everything, from wig makers, let alone the librettists.
Did you just say wig makers?
Yes. There's all the behind the scenes stuff, all the technical aspects, the people who make the sets, and so many operas now use technology. It's a wonderful collaboration. It's a bit like a moving film.
Wow, it's a lovely expression, a moving film.
I didn't answer your question though about which is the funniest.
Well, it probably will come to you when you're not thinking about it.
My last collaboration, and that's the other thing that happens, when you work with a librettist, they forever hound you with ideas. So you feel sort of treacherous if you go and write with somebody else and somebody else gets jealous. I've had a librettist sort of barge in the way of another writer and sort of nearly fisticuffs, but not quite.
You do live on the edge. What about the actual music making, though? I remember you writing about, in your book, Becoming a Composer, about getting used to the idea of restrictions and restraints and constrictions, and not always just the free flow of expression. Do you do the characters first and then the music? I mean, I guess that's the way it would.
Usually, if I'm writing a story myself, I might just occasionally do both together. But usually you have the story, you think of the scenario, how dramaturgically it will move, and then I work with just a short score, just the voices, and say the piano part. But that is crucial, that first part, because that's when you're trying to get to the heart of the characters through the music.
Do you dream about them?
Oh yes, I still dream about some of them now.
What ones from the part? Oh.
Yeah. It's because the music has to make them real. A few years ago, I saw an on-stage version of Peter Grimes, and that's an opera, by Benjamin Britten. That's an opera. You don't need any sets. You don't need lighting. Everything is there, and all the information is there in the music, and that's what you hope for. So it could be a question of an interval, or a character might have a particular rhythm. And then, of course, once you come to orchestrate, that whole world opens up yet another character.
Do you do this? I know you say you're collaborating, but what about in your lighthouse? Do you dream these things up in your lighthouse on your own?
Yes, pretty much. In fact, I made three operas in the lockdown we had to make them by Zoom. So one was in Chicago, so that's time difference. I was zooming into a very echoey room, that was awful. And then another one was in London. And then there was a ballet in Switzerland. So we were collaborating, but for example, Dido's Ghost, which is my most recent large-scale opera, we never ever had a sing-through all together. But I would Zoom with each singer, and it was amazing how we could do it, really. So we were definitely collaborating, but my violin concerto was done via WhatsApp, so technology is our friend.
That's amazing. There's got to, I mean, maybe it's already been done, but there's got to be a documentary in making an opera, composing an opera by Zoom, putting together an opera by Zoom. Amazing. Now, so one other thing that I was really struck by reading about you is how you don't waste time and energy on negative thoughts.
Try not to.
Seem to. I think that's incredibly laudable, especially given all the hurdles and challenges. And there's not really any bitter criticism in your book either. You reflect on
There's
things.
a tiny little bit, but...
Oh, where's that? By the way, I should just say you very kindly offered to send us a couple of copies of Becoming a Composer, so we'll have them in the college. But, you were pondering, when you could have been so critical of the establishment, you do tend to flip things so that they seem like chances, so that you turn them into something. And I thought one really good example of that was when you resisted the temptation to talk about the gatekeepers of new music concerts, when you were saying that back in the 80s and 90s you were going to concerts, new music concerts, and it was same old. But instead of saying something mean, you just wrote, and I'm going to quote you here, "There were a lot of brown jumpers." I thought, that's so good. That really sums it up. It's like the art of understatement. But very powerful. You didn't actually need to say anything more because it kind of said it all. So what's next for you, given everything you've achieved?
Some lovely projects. I'm developing what will be a bit like a Noah's flood, but of telling the Christmas story. And it's a wonderful project that actually Benjamin Britten had started and collected text from Chester Miracle plays, mystery plays, and I'm working on them now with Frederick Waite Walker, and it'll go to Aldburn 2026. We're very excited about that because it involves whole community, children, amateurs and professionals.
Oh, amazing. Wonderful. And I think before we're going to wrap up in about 5 minutes, but I wondered, so you've got these projects in the pipeline and you've got a whole raft of projects behind you. Are there any unfulfilled ambitions? Don't have to necessarily be related to music, but what goes on in the other half of your brain that's not the music one?
I mean, having
poetry, I guess, as well.
Yes, having made a friend who's an astronaut, I do often imagine myself in space, but I keep thinking, would I really like to go there? But I keep thinking I've been there. So through talking with him, I imagine myself in space quite a lot of the time.
That's brilliant.
I don't know if that's an ambition.
Could there be another opera? So could you be the first opera to be staged in space?
Well, actually, he and I wrote a song in space collaboration, so we've done...
I've been there, done that. Yeah. I should have known that, yeah.
No, actually, that would be a good idea.
Oh, there
Thank
you
you.
go.
You will
I'm
get
gonna-
some royalties.
At risk of being strangled now. And I think, so we like to ask visitors to the college this because it can be so useful, not just for our students. We pretend it's for our students, but it's for all of us, which is, what advice would you give your younger self? If you think back to, gosh, I wish someone had told me this, this, or this.
There's really many things. What is it? I might even say, I think I practiced a bit too much. I should have got out a bit more. Like, I thought, if I practice all the time, somebody will know who I am and find me. But of course they can't, because I'm at home. So I might have said that.
Yeah, that I think the senior tutor and deputy senior tutor will agree with the. We have a sort of thriving Girton skills program here, where we do encourage students to go out and do stuff that's not necessarily related to their immediate coursework. What else? Do you feel do you feel you were broad enough in what you actually read and studied, or were you one of these really obsessive music students? Yeah.
I do feel a lack. I feel that the study of music means that musicians tend to be, what's the word, just a little bit behind. Trent, my good friend John Butt, we had a lecture here at Cambridge, and he's saying, what is the one field that's 15 years behind it, anything else? And we kept thinking, and he said it's music, because people are too busy practicing. It really takes up all your time. And so sometimes we tend to be a little bit, we could be a little bit broader. I would love to have more time to read, for example.
Oh, go, amen. Now, I think we've got 5 minutes, I think, remaining. So I just wondered if, we don't normally take too many questions, but does anyone have anything burning they'd like to ask Errollyn before we move off to the ceremony bit?
Do you consider that there's essentially, there ideally should essentially be a difference between the process of composing and the process of making the music itself, as in playing music? Like, because sometimes, in some styles, those are more separated. Sometimes they're more sort of part of one thing. Do you think that they're essentially different or the same thing?
They definitely use different bits of the brain, but I think the more a musician can integrate the two together, it's much better. So it's no surprise that so many composers will be performers as well. Just simply to understand what what a performer has to go through. And also I find if I perform myself, it just gives you something, a really deep knowledge from a different place. I think there was a time, where composers, fairly recently felt that these were two separate activities, but I think it's good to perform and write music.
Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. I was really struck by the comments around jealousy and the kind of relationship between individuals within a certain field. I think jealousy is kind of quite a common, rather sort of unspoken trend in academia as well. We love our colleagues, but we're also sometimes quite jealous of them. And I suppose one thing you can certainly say about academia is that it's inevitably quite derivative. We're all kind of depending on each other. And I wondered how you balance in composition the sort of inevitability of being to some extent dependent on each other's work with the desire, the sort of instinct to kind of give your own unique voice. Like, how is it always going to be derivative inevitably, or can you do something wholly you?
I always say to my students, and I definitely say it to myself, that you could give a whole range of composers the same material and it would just come out different. It just would. But I feel a certain amount of, so say for example, Stravinsky asked to see Benjamin Britten's end of year accounts, and he would just notice the subjects. But I think it raises standards in a way. But composers really, good composers just can't help being themselves. But it's great to be aware of what's out there. Did I answer your question? I'm not sure I did. Did I?
Yeah, you sure did.
Are there any composers, I suppose, who you wish you had written their music?
Oh, all the time. Oh, yes. In fact, what was I doing? In my violin concerto, sometimes I sneak little bits in, just like a bar here or there.
What?
No, for example, I wrote this violin concerto for a Russian-American violinist, and he was telling me about the first chord that Stravinsky started his violin concerto from. So just, there's one little moment, and you just hear the chord, and it's like, it's a way of being, I don't know, being connected to, you know, to what they had to go through as well. And it was a chord that was thought was impossible to play, but then it proved possible.
Oh, that sounds intriguing. I'll listen out for
So I
that.
just popped it in.
Amazing. Right, well, I think we should probably, sadly, wrap up and move to the formal ceremony bit. But before we do, I think a massive round of applause, please.